All right, last night on this program, we showed you a video of a former Obama official, Evelyn Farkas, from earlier this month, saying that she urged her former colleagues and people on the Hill to get as much information and intelligence as they could on the Trump team before President Obama left office. Now, on March 2nd, during an NBC interview, Dr. Farkas, who served in the Obama administration from 2012 through 2015 as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, Eurasia. Listen to these comments very, very closely. Listen.
I was urging my former colleagues and frankly speaking, the people on the Hill, it was more actually aimed at telling the Hill people, get as much information as you can, get as much intelligence as you can before President Obama leaves the administration, because I had a fear that somehow that information would disappear with the senior people who left. So it would be hidden away in the bureaucracy, that the Trump folks, if they found out how we knew what we knew about the Trump staff dealing with Russians, that they would try to compromise those sources and methods, meaning we would no longer have access to that intelligence. So I became very worried because not enough was coming out into the open, and I knew that there was more. We have very good intelligence on Russia. So then I had talked to some of my former colleagues, and I knew that they were trying to also help get information to the Hill.
How we knew what we knew about the Trump staff's dealing with Russia. All right, let's deal with what Evelyn Farkas is saying here. First, she's admitting what we've been saying, what Sarah Carter, John Solomon, James Rosen have all been saying. Surveillance took place. Take a watch.
It was more actually aimed at telling the Hill people, get as much information as you can, get as much intelligence as you can before President Obama leaves the administration, because I had a fear that somehow that information would disappear with the senior people.
Oh, that's the intelligence she wants her friends on Capitol Hill to get. Is that the information she's talking about? Now, next, she admits there was unmasking. That shouldn't happen. Watch.
That the Trump folks, if they found out how we knew what we knew about the Trump staff dealing with Russians, that they would try to compromise those sources and methods, meaning we would no longer have access to that intelligence.
Intelligence, unmasking, surveillance. Now, she also admitted that intelligence leaking was taking place. And by the way, in case some of you people don't know, that could very well be a felony. Take a look.
I became very worried because not enough was coming out into the open, and I knew that there was more. We have very good intelligence on Russia. So then I had talked to some of my former colleagues, and I knew that they were trying to also help get information to the Hill.
How did you know there was intelligence? You were out of the administration. How did Evelyn Farkas, a former Obama administration official, a private citizen working for the Hillary Clinton campaign, know about the surveillance and intelligence? Well, during an interview on CNBC earlier today, Farkas, well, she seemed to be walking back and changing her tune. Watch her contradict her own self. Straight ahead.
People are accusing you, Evelyn, of admitting that there was surveillance, admitting that there was unmasking, and urging people, or at least saying that intelligence leaking, which could be a felony, is the way that it should get out. And you weren't even part of the government at that point.
No. So I was referring to the motivation, because there had been a lot of discussion in the media about why are people leaking. And so I was trying to, but in a very shorthand fashion, explain at the very end of that quote that people were leaking because they were afraid of a cover-up. I do not, absolutely do not condone leaking. You know, it's against the law.
Wait a minute. She said earlier, get as much intelligence as you can. Get it up to the Hill, to our friends. So now opposing leaking, even though earlier this month she was obviously claiming to encourage it. Now, Farkas also played dumb on what information she was referring to. Watch this walk back. This is interesting.
Sean Hannity and others have made a big issue of this, and I wanted you to just explain what you meant by that, and in particular when you talked about if they found out how we knew. What do you mean by how we knew?
Well, what I was getting at was the fact that we were having now a transition of power from the Obama administration to the Trump administration. And if indeed there was an investigation ongoing, if indeed there was information that the Obama administration had about Russian interference and possible American involvement, I wanted to make sure that Congress knew about it.
Were there specific pieces of information that you're concerned would disappear?
No. No, I did not know what the information was or I suspected that they had information. Again, knowing what I know about our intelligence community, they're very professional. They have a very good eye on Russia.
If indeed, now she says, if it's suspected, but wait a minute, this is the same woman that said if, meaning the Trump folks, found out how we knew what we knew, not if it happened, if they knew what we knew about the Trump staff, dealing with Russians. Now, try as she might, Dr. Farkas cannot walk back her original comments. And today, we have also uncovered an interview that Dr. Farkas did back in February with Vox before that appearance on NBC. She was asked by Ezra Klein what her, quote, level of alarm was after Flynn's resignation. Here's Farkas's response, quote, well, it's lower than it's been since the summer when I was first made aware of all this stuff. I'm like, finally, everybody else sees it. Seriously? The reason I was so upset last summer was that I was getting winks and hints from inside that there was something really wrong here. I was agitated because I knew the Clinton campaign and the world didn't know. But I didn't think it would happen this fast. I didn't think Flynn would survive a year, but I thought it would be most of the year. Well, did she know about Flynn, the intelligence that eventually got leaked that took him out? What is she talking about here? Anyway, who was giving her the winks and the hints over the summer? Now, I'm just asking questions based on her own words. Here's where it gets interesting. Today, during another interview on MSNBC, Farkas said she's now the victim of fake news because we play her entire comment in context. I'm not kidding. Watch this.
And on the dark campaign of fake news, you know, that's still ongoing. We see even someone like myself get swept up in all of this. Right. You know, when people like me are speaking on behalf of process, people spin it to suit their needs. And I think it may be that the Russians are behind even such fake news today.
Maybe the Russians put these words in my mouth asking about surveillance, unmasking, and leaking intelligence. I'm simply asking questions based on what she said, as other members of the mainstream media, by the way, continue to ignore the facts in this case. The media doesn't want to focus on this today. Oh, no, they want to focus on the New York Times headline that came out late this afternoon. 2 White House officials helped give Nunes intelligence reports. Now, the headline is deceptive, obscure, and I would argue purposely dishonest. If you read further into the report, it isn't really a story. It just says the official, quote, played a role. Now, tonight I'm calling on the intel community, stop being distracted by the hate Trump media, destroy Trump media. The Attorney General, General Sessions, needs to convene a grand jury. And the only thing we know for sure is that the intel was leaked about retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. That is a felony. That is a crime. And as for Dr. Farkas, well, we need to know what she knew about the unmasking, about the surveillance, and when she knew it, and who she was communicating with, and who was giving her the information. And what did she know also about leaking or getting the information to her friends on the Hill? Here with
new information now on North Korea. The rogue nation may be preparing for, yes, another nuclear test. Satellite imagery showing signs of activity at the country's underground testing site. The latest round of saber rattling comes as we learn more details about President Trump's planned meeting with the president of China next week. Joining me now is Michael Auslin, Director of Japan Studies at the American Enterprise Institute and author of The End of the Asian Century. Let's talk first, sir, about what this means about the build-up to yet another possible nuclear test by North Korea, especially on the eve of these meetings that we expect from President Trump and President Xi at Mar-a-Lago next week.
Hey, Ed. Well, look, it's something we should expect. The North Koreans, first of all, have a cycle for doing tests because they're in the midst of trying to perfect their weapon. That's number one. Number two, they do try to time these either to American holidays or to important meetings, basically to let the world know and to let the counterparts of North Korea know that they're still there. So the reality is I don't think we should be surprised. The big question is, can President Trump put pressure on China to finally begin resolving this crisis?
And, you know, I've heard the same from covering the White House of President Bush, President Obama as well. Get the Chinese to put pressure, and it never seems to happen.
Well, I think because what we expect is that they can put political pressure on the North, and I think that's mistaken. This is a leader, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, who is really uncontrollable in many ways. What we have to do is tell China that if they don't start putting economic pressure on North Korea, which is the type of leverage that they have, then we're going to take steps against the Chinese companies and the Chinese banks that are in essence abetting North Korea with billions of dollars in trade.
What about Senator John McCain? He's powerful chairman, obviously, of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and he basically said this week that Kim Jong-un is, quote, a crazy fat kid, and that led the dictator to shoot back, and maybe it's just rhetorical, but to shoot back that there's going to be dire consequences for statements like that. What are we really to make of this North Korean leader? Is he just simply a crazy fat kid?
Well, if he is, he's a crazy fat kid who controls an enormous military and nuclear weapons, so it's not really helpful to call him that. I don't think any of the North Korean leaders have been crazy. They have been ruthless, and he is maybe the most ruthless among them. But what really worries me is that when you talk to folks in the intel community and folks who have worked on North Korea for a long time, they think that this is a guy who really is uncontrollable in a lot of ways. He's not as strategic as his father and grandfather was. This is a guy who is much more violent, much more dangerous, willing to use VX nerve gas in an airport in another country. That's why you have to put the real pressure on him to make it clear that if he steps out of that box, you know, he may no longer exist as a leader of this country.
So I take your point, Michael, that, look, this might be somebody who's crazy and uncontrollable, but he has nukes, and we have to obviously take him seriously. But some of these recent tests have seemed to have been abject failures that, you know, blow up within seconds. What are we to make of that? Is it just a lot of bluster, or can he back up these tests? How nervous, how worried should the international community be?
We should be very worried. Look, they learn even from the failures, just as we did back in the early days of the space program when all of our rockets blew up on the pad. You know, they're going to get there. And in fact, if you look at the most recent set of missile launches, they launched 3 missiles towards Japan. They put 3 missiles into the same vicinity in Japanese waters at about the same time. That's some pretty good shooting. That means that they have capabilities and they're extending them. So it's not something to take lightly at all.
So it's serious business. Last question, 30 seconds. If you were advising President Trump, what would be the one takeaway you'd want him to get out of that little mini summit at Mar-a-Lago next week?
The first one is tell the Chinese we're going to go right after the financial resources of this regime. And number 2, the Chinese better start shutting down their companies and banks that are helping, or we're going to do it for them.
Well, we'll see if they actually follow through on that. Michael Lawson, we appreciate your insights today.
Well, there was a lot of breaking news this afternoon. First, at approximately 1:15 p.m., the New York Times named the 2 sources that House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes has said showed him the evidence that communications from the Trump transition team had been incidentally collected. Fox News has confirmed the sources independently. They are White House staffers at the National Security Council, lawyer Michael Ellis, and Intel Director Ezra Cohen-Watnick. That led to this flurry of activity at Ranking Member Adam Schiff's presser on Capitol Hill.
If, in fact, the National Security Council staff that discovered these materials reportedly in the ordinary course of business are the same National Security staff that provided them to the chairman to be provided to the president, it raised a profound question why they were not directly provided to the White House by the National Security staff and instead were provided through a circuitous route involving the chairman. If that was designed to hide the origin of the materials, that raises profound questions about just what the White House is doing that need to be answered.
So to unpack what we have, there are 3 investigations going on over 2 separate topics. First topic, whether or not there was any collusion with the Russians by Team Trump during the election, and the second being, was there surveillance of Team Trump by the intel departments, and if so, who unmasked the names of those being surveilled? Also, very important, was that very unmasking even legal? So much to talk about, so let's jump right in. And Dana, we'll start with you. What was the big information that we got today?
Well, I think there's 2, and we're going to get to it a little bit later about the Senate hearing, which I thought was also interesting. In this case, this is another day, yet another story, which actually leads to more questions than answering them. And I go back to the thing, I really think the White House should appoint somebody who is the communications person that is just answering these questions, because if not, they will not be able to talk about anything else. You have a couple of different threads here. I'll just point out 2 of them. So Sean Spicer has not said at the podium who had actually cleared Representative Nunes into the White House. And looked like I know how that goes. Like, you don't even want to ask to find out. And the other thing, the people in the White House should actually try to protect him, because he has to go out there and have to answer all of these questions.
The other thing is that Nunes says in one of his interviews that he doesn't think that anybody in the West Wing even knows, we had any idea that what he was doing when he was over there. How could that possibly be? When one of the lawyers, Michael Ellis, who used to work for Nunes on the House Intelligence Committee, was his general counsel, is actually, his title is Special Assistant to the President. And maybe his office is actually in the old executive office building because there's not enough office space there in the West Wing, but he is part of the West Wing staff. The other thing is that now the committee, now the White House says, well, the Democrats of the committee, now they are welcome to come to the White House to see the same information. They could have saved themselves all of this headache by doing that at the very beginning. I just think that they keep creating more problems for themselves by just trying to win a news cycle than just cooperating with the investigation and letting it run its course.
Greg, and we're still trying to figure out, now, General Flynn, Michael Flynn, was unmasked, right?
Yes.
Now we're trying to figure out, was he surveilled legally, and was he unmasked legally? And maybe finally, we have both committees, Senate and House Intel committees, coming to the White House to discuss all the information, maybe we can get some answers to that one as well.
This story is a fat man's sweater. You pull one string, and it unravels and unravels and unravels, and we're going to talk about it for the next 4 years. Obviously, you're right. It's not about the incidental collection, but the dissemination. It's one thing for the pharmacist to know what pills you're taking. It's another thing for him to talk about it at a convention of pharmacists in their underground secret lair beneath Walgreens. So that's the problem. But Nunes is somewhat faulted. He has to be faulted for going to the town square first before going to the sheriff, i.e. Sheriff Woody, Adam Schiff. They are dead ringers for each other. I've said it before. But if he'd gone to Adam Schiff maybe before and then gone to the town square, I think it would make a little more sense.
Yep.
But that's just me. And what do I know? Very little.
No, you know a lot.
No, I disagree.
I disagree with your disagreement. One, Team Trump, they've been surveilled, they've been unmasked, maybe illegally unmasked, they've been accused. Some people would say that they're victims in this.
You know, I don't even know where to start with you some days. You know, but let me just say.
How about I love you?
You can start with surveilled,
How about
or you can go to unmasked.
Yeah, let's do that.
Accused.
Okay, nobody. Devin Nunes doesn't say it was illegal. It was legal surveillance. And if in the course of legal surveillance they incidentally collected some information or people who were Americans, typically that's supposed to be masked. But it's not a matter of legal or illegal.
No,
Well,
and actually, one of the reports, and of course I've not seen the document, so I don't know.
Really?
Finds out that basically it was Russians talking amongst themselves about how they were trying to get influence into the Trump team. So they're talking about people that work for President Trump, and they want access to him. That's how their names are in there. It's not like those people were actually talking to the Russians, according to that one report, which I think I can understand why they would want Nunes to come and then go to try to protect them. But I also feel like if they found that information, why not take it to the White House General Counsel's office or to the press office and say, here, you take this, instead of trying to this like really Keystone Cop sort of way of getting Nunes to come and try to do their dirty work for them.
Well, let me just add one quick thing before Lisa jumps in, which is that I was surprised today when Paul Ryan was interviewed. And Paul Ryan says, when Nunes came to see me, Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, and so he's, in essence, Nunes' boss. So when Nunes comes to see me, he says, Nunes gives me the impression, oh, there were some whistleblowers. I got this information from whistleblowers. Well, today we find out...
The intel community.
What is he talking...
No, he said that they worked for the intel community.
Well, he said they were whistleblowers. I didn't know that part, worked for the intel community. But he said that they were whistleblowers. And now we find out, basically, it was the White House blowing smoke intentionally to obstruct and obscure the legitimate investigation of this case. And to me, that's the headline.
I'm not sure that's the leap we're all willing to take, that the White House was trying to obstruct and obscure the information.
Where'd the information come from? We know it came from the White House.
We understand.
No, we know it came from the White House at this point.
We don't exactly know what the information is, Juan. We know that's who the sources are.
But
we don't know what the actual information is yet.
Well,
I mean, ultimately, it's all concerning. I mean, it's concerning the fact that there's an FBI investigation. It's concerning the fact that there's the unmasking of names, that there's illegal leaks of classified information, especially when you have people like Gowdy in the Russian hearing, essentially trying to pin the blame at the Obama administration's feet. You also have that on the backdrop of the fact that President Obama changed the NSA rules for how information can be widely disseminated across the government. You also have the New York Times article about the Obama administration leaving breadcrumbs of intelligence information behind. That's all concerning. So all of this is concerning. But in regards, well, real quick, in regards to Chairman Nunes, where he needs to be concerned, and I do agree with Dana in the sense that there was so much that could have been done to avoid a lot of this backlash. And the problem he's going to face if more Republicans like Representative Dent, like Walter Jones, that step forward and ask for him to step down, that's when he's going to start to face real heat.
I want to turn to the next topic, but before we go there, and it's something that dovetails to what you just said, Lisa, Evelyn Farkas. I really want to bring this up. I think this is extremely important. Evelyn Farkas worked in the State Department. She was Assistant Deputy Secretary to Russian Affairs. She told the Obama White House, after she left, she went back and told the Obama White House, she left in 2015, when President Trump was President-elect Trump, she told the Obama White House to put away some of the information that they were gathering, that the Obama White House was gathering on the Trump transition team. How does a mid-level, not a high level, but a mid-level Assistant Deputy Secretary of Russian Affairs, maybe Dana can answer this, how does she have access to this information, and why should she be advising the current White House, Obama White House, on this?
I don't know her at all, and I also know that I thought it was interesting, because I looked into that yesterday. She made those remarks about 6 weeks ago.
Yeah, March 2nd.
So it's not new information.
March
the actually only new information that we have today is that we actually know that the information and the sources for Representative Nunes came from the White House. That's actually the new development today. Like all the other stuff, the unmasking of Flynn, are still the unanswered questions and still part of the investigation. I don't know how she
I will tell you, I'm sorry, Lisa, we want to get this next soundbite because it's on this topic. Hopefully they're going to call some of these witnesses. Boy, guys, this would be my first witness to find out what the heck she was involved with, her involvement was, and who else had access and who else was able to unmask. Anyway, all right, the Senate Intel Committee held its first public hearing today on Russia's meddling in our election. The FBI is also investigating whether the Trump campaign in any way worked with the Russians. Is the president himself under investigation? Speaker Ryan doesn't think so.
I do not believe that that's the case.
So if we don't know that,
well,
do you think
I won't speak for the FBI, but I've never seen any suggestion or any evidence that that's the case. I don't believe that he is. So I don't think that he is under investigation. No one has suggested that he is, and not even in a vague way. I don't believe that he is.
Our chief intelligence correspondent, Catherine Herridge, just spoke to one of the president's campaign advisors wrapped up in this controversy. Carter Page will be a witness at next week's Senate hearings. Here's a preview of what we can expect to hear.
Did you work with the Russians to help the Trump campaign?
Absolutely not. I did nothing that could even be possibly viewed as helping them in any way.
Did you work with the Russians to hurt the Clinton campaign?
Absolutely not. In no way, shape, or form.
And there'll be more of that interview tonight on Special Report at 6 p.m. Eastern. I'm sorry, Lisa, I cut you off before. Your thoughts on thoughts on this?
Well, I was going to say, ultimately, I think all of the conversations that we're having, which is what makes the FBI investigation the most important here, because hopefully that is one that is being done with politics aside, and also has the biggest consequences, obviously, that could lead to legal ramifications. So that's what is ultimately, I think, the most important thing here. But also, I think what was important today in the Senate hearing as well is the conversation of the fact that the Russian meddling and meddling in our election is something that has been long happening in both U.S. And European elections, which is what came up today. We also had Russia not that long ago hack into the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So, this is important, but this is something that we have long been dealing with.
You know what struck me, too, was Nunes said he'd never heard of Carter Page.
Yep.
Or Holy smokes. He never heard of Roger Stone. He never heard of Carter Page. I mean, is that credible? I mean, talk about sacrificing not only your credibility, but the idea that you are a serious person in Washington. I mean, we sit here, Eric, we know who Carter Page is. We know Roger Stone. And the guy who's supposed to be in charge of the House probe says, oh, I never heard of him. That's just, I mean, it's beyond reasonable.
You know what I find interesting with these hearings is how the openness in which the Democrats and Republicans both are so willing to dissect the chilling nature of an adversary, which is something they refuse to do with Islamism. When I'm watching this and I see the interest in Russia, and I understand Russian meddling in our election, it's a bad thing. It's very bad. But it's an easy target to take because it doesn't have with it the baggage of bigotry that prevents our politicians from saying, no, there's an existential threat that we should be having hearings about every day. It's called Islamism, but we won't do that. And then meanwhile, you see that the left, they're finally up in arms about Soviet but now Russian aggression and intrusion after 4 decades in which tens of millions of people suffered and died at the hands of communism, and here they are upset over spam bots.
No, but I don't think we need to wait. I think that both the things you say, I mean, I have tremendous fear for us in terms of the terrorists, but let's be clear. There was testimony today, we'll get into it in a moment, Eric said, in terms of the Senate, and one person said, it's very clear, the Russians are trying to encourage a sense of disbelief in democracy.
I've said it on this show 5 times.
They're trying to take apart the European Union. They're trying to take apart NATO. These are
for
really
decades.
Yeah,
but I also think
it's been intensified to the point that this very week, guess what? They're going after Paul Ryan. Well, wait a minute. They're just trying to foment dissent and discontinue and disrupt.
We also do a pretty good job on our own of undermining trust in institutions.
Let's stay on these hearings for a second. So, Dana, on one hand, it can be said that Devin Nunes may not have, I don't know, unveiled some of the information or handled this investigation properly or the way you would like it or we would like it. But Adam Schiff also made some accusations that he had to walk back about having direct evidence versus circumstantial evidence.
I do think that there's just such a stark difference between how the House chairman, both the Senate and the Democrat, have handled this and how the senators yesterday, Warner and Burr, handled it. And I actually think I would end the House investigation. I would abandon it. And I would let the senators do the investigation because it seems like that's the serious one that is not tainted. I don't think anybody's going to believe anything that comes out of the House. So let the Senate handle it, let the FBI handle it, and move on from there.
With the Senate, the way you described it, I think we would all agree with you. Does that eliminate the need for an independent investigator, given what the
if you are at the White House and you think that is in your best interest, that you don't want a special prosecutor, then yeah, I think it could.
I think more and more Republicans are coming to the conclusion we do need a special prosecutor. And I might add, Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney said that, this comes back to what we were just discussing, Greg, that he considers what the Russians did an act of war.
No, I'm not saying that what the Russians did was okay. I'm just saying that they're hardwired to take advantage of our vulnerabilities. When our guard goes down, the bear wakes up. So the best outcome for us is to understand that and accept it and move on to the bigger issues, which are terror. That is our existential threat. It's not Russia.
I wanted you to say that because we're going to talk more about this in the next block, so you got to come up with more notes.
Damn it!
Good evening. I'm Shannon Breedman for Brett Baer. We have new information tonight about who may have been talking to House Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes about the previous administration's surveillance that scooped up some of Donald Trump's associates. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts begins our coverage tonight with some late-breaking news. Good evening, John.
Shannon, good evening to you. The tick-tock of all of this is becoming clearer tonight. It appears that staffers at the National Security Council came across a number of instances in which the names of members of President Trump's transition, including the president-elect himself, were showing up in intelligence documents. That information was then brought to the attention of the White House counsel's office, which alerted the Intelligence Committee chairman in the House, Devin Nunes, who had been charged with heading up the investigation into possible surveillance of Trump transition officials. Fox News has confirmed that 2 White House staffers, NSC Intelligence Chief Ezra Cohen-Watnick and Michael Ellis of the White House counsel's office, aided Congressman Devin Nunes in his March 21st search for intelligence at the White House complex. The disclosure raised more questions about connections between the House Intelligence Committee chairman and the administration. At the daily briefing today, Press Secretary Sean Spicer stressed what's important is the substance, not the process.
Your obsession with who talked to whom and when is not the answer here. It should be the substance. It seems now that you continue to look at it from a backwards prism, which is, what happened, who drove in what gate, who did they meet with, what were they wearing that day, as opposed to what's the underlying substance of this. Did something happen happened in the 2016 election. Did leaks occur?
The White House today tried to change the subject, revealing the NSC has uncovered information relevant to the investigation into whether intelligence on transition officials had been mishandled and leaked, and is eager to share it with the intelligence committees.
We have and will invite the Senate and House ranking members and chairman up to the White House to view that material in accordance with their schedule.
The ranking member of the House committee was quick to accept the invitation, but added if these are the same materials Nunes viewed, that's troubling.
It raised a profound question why they were not directly provided to the White House by the national security staff, and instead were provided through a circuitous route involving the chairman.
As the White House continues to try to dig itself out of the political hole created by the president's tweets a month ago, the president is trying to advance his agenda at the expense of the House Freedom Caucus, this morning tweeting, quote, "The Freedom Caucus will hurt the entire Republican agenda if they don't get on the team and fast. We must fight them and Dems in 2018. The tweet laid bare the president's anger at the Freedom Caucus, which many Republicans believe botched the plan to repeal and replace Obamacare.
It's very understandable that the president is frustrated that we haven't gotten to where we need to go, because this is something we all said we would do.
Most people don't take well to being bullied.
Freedom Caucus member Justin Amash of Michigan didn't take kindly to the president's attacks.
It's constructive in 5th grade, but it may allow a child to get his way, but that's not how our government works.
The president is hoping to divide and conquer, peel off Freedom Caucus members like Texas Congressman Ted Poe, who quit the caucus after the health care debacle. Freedom Caucus co-founder Jim Jordan urged the president to stay calm, that there's still a chance to repeal and replace Obamacare.
This is our best chance, but not this bill. So, I mean, look, it was just a postponement. Some people, like, the sky has fallen, the world's going to end. The sun came up today. It'll come up tomorrow. Let's just take a little bit more time to get it right.
Some members of the Freedom Caucus aren't afraid of the president's threats, but others aren't particularly keen to go toe-to-toe with the president in districts where he is just as, if not more, popular than they are. Shannon?
All right, John Roberts live at the White House. Thank you, John.
All right. We had the sheriff on yesterday, is making a big to-do, and he says because he doesn't like any representative, as was the case in New England, where you have a representative who wanted to give a heads up to any illegals who would be in our area if there was going to be an ICE raid. This sheriff said, well, you've made my job a lot more complicated. We have Judge Andrew Napolitano joining us right now. His point was, what the heck? What's the law of the land? What do you think of this?
Well, the law of the land is that the federal government cannot compel local law enforcement to work for the federal government. But local law enforcement has taken the same oath as federal law enforcement has, which is to enforce the laws of the land. So does local law enforcement have to go out and arrest undocumented aliens? No. Can it hide them? Can it secrete them? Can it frustrate the job of the feds?
Can it look the other way, which is typically what they do?
It can look the other way, but it cannot aggressively, actively hide them or frustrate what the feds are doing. That's called obstruction of justice. So we had a case we looked at the other day where a judge sentenced an illegal alien to time served and said, I don't want you to leave the courthouse. I'm going to keep you in my chambers until the feds that are around the building leave. That's probably obstruction of justice.
Obviously, it complicates, let's say, a sheriff's job, because in the case of this one, he's trying to help ICE, round up illegals, let's say, and you have a local representative trying to thwart that. So what are the rules on that?
The rules will change the next time the Congress enacts a budget, because the new budget will say, we'll use as an example, we're going to talk about Seattle in a few minutes, here's $100 million for your police department. As a condition of accepting this $100 million, you agree that the police will work with the feds, will work with ICE when we're looking for people. Once they accept the $100 million, they have a legal obligation to work with the feds. So all of this will change 6 or 8 months from now, once the new block grants come out. But under the Obama-era block grants, the money that's still being distributed by the federal government, where those conditions don't exist, the locals can avoid the feds.
How can they, though, Judge?
them, but avoid
it's
them.
the law of the land, right? Or sanctuary cities, they've been there and around for so long that there's no stopping them.
Well, look, if the feds want the New York City police to help them find undocumented aliens in this neighborhood, they can't order them, the New York City police, to work for them. If they want to bring more feds in, they can do that. If they give grant blocks to New York City in October and the condition is the police will help, then the police will be legally obliged to help. So we're basically still under the Obama regime with respect to the conditions for the receipt of funds.
Gotcha. Now, Seattle is suing over this and saying that the Trump administration just can't threaten to cut off federal funds. You drew a distinction with new federal funds, new block grants.
They can threaten. They can't take money back that's already been committed for this fiscal year, which goes till September 30th. But the flip side of this is the litigation from Seattle is frivolous because they haven't been harmed yet. The feds haven't taken a nickel away from you. You can't sue because you think somebody's going to hurt you. You sue after they have hurt you.
Where is this going? Because we have these sanctuary cities and states and whole regions, and then in New York and in Chicago. And what?
The states and the cities have never turned down federal grants because the conditions were too burdensome. So President Trump and the executive branch and the Republican majorities in Congress will have to endure this frustration until the next fiscal year, when they dangle that cash in front of all these cities and they take the cash, and when they take it, they take the strings that are attached with it as well. That's what the Supreme Court has ruled.
But isn't it a whole different matter, Judge, when you get to a point of not only looking the other way, but as this representative was advocating in Massachusetts, actually warning illegals, hey, ICE agents are coming.
That would probably be misconduct in office if done by somebody who took an oath to uphold the law. If done by a Catholic priest or bishop who wants to hide them in the basement, not misconduct in office because they're not in the government. So we get a little dicey here as to who can do what.
Is it your sense to, I mean, this gets in the realm of politics here, but this stuff and everything else that's going on, and the Russians and who knew what and when, just to dislodge the Trump agenda?
I do. I think it's a massive onslaught against him from people in the media and in local and state government who still can't believe that he's president and want to put as many and they want to put as many obstacles in his path as possible. The Hawaii judge that ruled last night extending the nationwide a ban on the travel order, if that same order had been signed by Barack Obama, would have been upheld. How do I know that? Because the reasons given for invalidating the order were things that Donald Trump said before he was president. I have never seen, before the Trump presidency, the words of a candidate used against an office holder. And the Supreme Court has cautioned against that. Because as we all know, candidates say things in the heat of the campaign that they don't necessarily follow up on.
You can glean intent, can't you?
You can glean intent, but you can't use somebody's words to frustrate, as a candidate, to frustrate what they do as an office holder. And that's what this judge in Hawaii did.
Amazing. All right, Judge, so good to see you, my friend.
Thank you, Neil. Good to be with you.
Mike Flynn saying that he will testify, but he would like immunity. What does that tell you?
That tells me his lawyers have told him you either have exposure, or if you don't have exposure, let's get some suspenders and belts on you nonetheless. I thought it was an unusual gesture on his part. It was okay for him to step forward and say, I'll testify, be happy to meet with him. But the request for immunity, I thought, was really troubling.
Yeah, I mean, it looks as if, you know, if he testifies, he's either going to have immunity or he could plead the fifth. I mean, you know, that's how this is eventually going to go. Juan, what is your thought on what Mike Flynn is looking for here?
Well, I think we've seen a pattern. Just to reiterate what Carl said, though, I think this is troubling in terms of the idea of his involvement and his exposure. I just think that this means that there is some. But secondly, I think it's a part of a larger pattern in which we've seen now Paul Manafort, Carter Page offer to testify before the House Intelligence Committee. And we know that that's part of the effort that Devin Nunes was caught up in, apparently led by the White House, to share information with Nunes, to get people before the committee, apparently, you know, to try to, I would say, derail the committee, but possibly to throw up smoke in defense of the Trump campaign.